Hi there, it's Mark, and today in Lightroom we are going to be looking at the lens blur feature. In a previous video, 3 degrees of separation, where we looked at different methods to make your subject pop from the background, we used defocusing and lens blur for one of those. I said I would embellish on it, and this is that video. So I've got 3 pictures for you today. They're all zipped up on my website, and the link to that is down below in the doobly-doo if you want to go and collect those pictures. We've got the Shields Ferry, which we're going to make look like a miniature by blurring the foreground and the background and a couple of other little edits anyway. I will be doing general edits on these as we go along, not just lens blur. Then we'll be looking at these boats in Seat and Sluice, and on this one we'll be just using lens blur to blur the background and also pick out 1 or 2 extra features that aren't in the blur, and we learn how to range that blur backward and forward. Then this one, my personal favourite because of how different it ends up being. This is the Sage. It's now called the Glass House Music Centre, the big greenhouse thing on the Gateshead side of the Tyne. This is the Sage, and taken at night, and we're going to give it a glow as a general edit, so we'll learn a bit more about masks and how to play with those, and we're going to introduce blur, and particularly the Bokeh or however you want to pronounce it. And we'll look at how we can adjust those features and styles that we have in there. So if that is something you're interested in doing, then stick around, because that's what we're going to do. I'll roll the titles while you collect these pictures to play along, and if you think this warrants a thumbs up, give it a thumbs up. If you can see the future, know that you will give it a thumbs up. Save some time, give it a thumbs up now, and click on that subscribe and ring that bell so to be notified of future videos. It takes no time at all, and it's really good for the channel. I can hardly say I've got thousands of people following, 1,300, 1,400. I'd love to get to 2,000 by Christmas, and that's my Christmas sorted. So help me, give me a present, click on subscribe. See you very shortly. Okay, so here is our first picture, the Shields Ferry, going from South Shields across the River Tyne to North Shields, and we are going to be doing a little edit on it first. I'm going to start with my crop tool because I prefer a bit of more of a letterbox on a landscapey type picture. So I'll set that to there. I'm going to do something with the sky, so let's use the masks, sky. Now notice how the sky leaches into below the horizon. I'm not worried about that on this picture, but if you are and you want to learn how to improve sky selections with Adobe Lightroom, then I will link to a video above now which contains some tips and tricks you might want to follow along. Anyhow, let's drop the highlights down a little bit. Let's bring the exposure down a touch. Highlights actually quite a bit. Get some contrast in there through clarity, some textured contrast, and some actual contrast, and I'm quite happy with that at the moment. So before and after, I'll leave it like that, and I want to draw our eye into the boat. The blur will do that for us. However, notwithstanding that, I'm going to put a linear gradient on. Now I'm not going to do a linear gradient that is really sharp like that. I want it quite feathered, and I'm going to bring it down so that it leads up to the boat, and I want it deliberately in the line of travel, including the wake, rather than straight. And on that I'm just going to use exposure down a little bit, so before and after on this, it draws your eye to the boat, or that stops your eye wandering down below. Okay, other than that, let's have a look at the lens blur tool. Here it is. Now the whole tool might not appear available to you. You have to click apply first, and it goes off and thinks about the picture and applies the blur. That stage may take longer or shorter depending on the picture, depending on the content, and depending on whether you've played with this before. I've played with this picture before, so it came back fairly quick. When I first did it, I think it took about 10 seconds. So still not all the tool is showing, so let's just click on brush refinement, so we open it up, and here is the tool in all its glory. We will be in the next picture using visualize depth, but for now we're just going to eyeball it looking at the picture. So what can we see that has happened? Well, there is blur at the top, there is blur at the bottom, and the boat seems to be unblurred except for the radio mast, which is there. So we want to fix that at least, but also some of this background, I want that a little bit more blurred as well. So let's address that with this slider. This slider represents near, which is close to the picture, and far, which is your background. Obvious, I know. But it all depends on how well Adobe can read what's in your picture to determine that. It's done quite a good job here for me. Let us slide it to the foreground, and you can see, as you would expect, all of this is now sharp and the blur's moved all the way down from the background into the foreground and beyond. If I slide it all the way the other way, we've now got the blur purely in the foreground and everything else in the background is sharp. Let's put it back roughly where it was. I didn't make a note of where it was. Somewhere around there, I think. Yes, that will do. Now what else to notice is this is the width which is not blurred. So let us use these handles and slide this in, and that makes the unblurred bit more narrow, which I think I prefer. I'm getting more blur creeping up and creeping down. I've got it into the buildings here, but I do want to address the fact we've still lost the radio mast and now the top of the boat. There are tools to help us with that, and first and foremost we've got a brush refinement. We can choose focus to get rid of the blur, or to add focus into where you have blurred, whichever way around you want to see it, or to add more blur. In this you've got the amount of blur or focus you want to add. You've got the flow, which is how quick it will come off your brush as you're painting. You've got the size and the feather. I want focus and I want to add it back in to the mast and across the top. So let us zoom in for the moment. So I'm using Control and plus on a PC, or Command and plus on a Mac. My space bar just to reposition it, and I want to address this. Now my brush seems a reasonable size for this, and so I'm just going to paint with focus on down through the mast area, and that should fix that. Now if this was against a brick wall, because I've spilled over the edges, I'd probably bring back some of the brick wall and that wouldn't look right. Now that is for a case where you'd want to have a smaller brush, a smaller amount possibly, less feather, and take your time. But here, because we're zoomed in and this is much of a background type thing, I can probably get away with it being a little bit slapdash. Okay, so I've brought most of that back. I'll just swipe down there again. Now one of the things I do want to do is, it's far too clear inside there, because that's part of the background we're seeing in here. So I'm going to swap over to blur, and I'm just going to blur those bits out and hopefully not get the railing. Just enough so your eye doesn't immediately catch it from further back. You don't have to be massively precise by the time you've zoomed out. You won't probably be able to tell. You know, when you do edits, it's only you that actually sees the edits. People don't necessarily look to see what you've done or whether you've made mistakes. If something stands out, they will notice, but unless their eye is drawn to it in the first place, they are none the wiser. And I need to fix this bit here and that railing there. So let's go back to focus and let's fix this bit here. And let's draw that along there. Is that part of my boat? I think it was. If not, I'll undo that. Yes, it's part of the railing is definitely on the top of the boat. I'm not going to spend too much time on that, but you can see what is what here. You can see how this is working, how I'm repairing a little bit overzealous in my global blur, if you like, and I'm fixing that with my paintbrush. My fault, I guess, for bringing the blur down. If you notice the background, blurs all the way down, so Adobe had to work out whether that bit of beige was actually further back than this bit of boat. So that's where it comes up with some anomalies. If I hadn't taken it so far, I would have been okay. Right, let's zoom back out again, shall we? And there you are. So there is our blurred boat. What else to do on this picture? Well, for the moment, I'm just going to add a slight vignette to draw the eye in a little bit further. And if you notice, I've got a red dot appeared underneath my mask. That is because I've created some masks, any masks, and then I've made a change to the content of the pixels underneath them. I've blurred them. So this is it saying your masks might not be 100% now. So pick any mask, doesn't matter which one, click on the three dots and update masks. It will reanalyze the pixels that the masks cover and make those minor corrections, and the red dot disappears to tell you all is well. So there you are. We've done that first one by eye. The backslash key shows you the before and after, and that is the effect we've got. I should have really pointed out one other glaring feature of the blur tool. It's the amount of blur. By default it's set at 50. Let's bump it up and see how much blur we actually get into the picture. Let's try 100. Now at 100 it has spilled slightly into the canopy of the boat. You may want to fix that, or you may just want to roll it back because I think the job was quite good at 50. Let's move to our next picture. Okay, so to image number 2. Let's do a little bit of an edit. I want to just lower some of these highlights over here and possibly darken coming up behind this boat. So let's go into a linear gradient and let's just pull a linear gradient over through those highlights and use a highlight slider to come down. Possibly expose it down a little bit. I don't want to lose the fact it's sun, so we'll take that to there. Let's add another linear gradient up to bring a darkness underneath that boat. Same sort of thing. Backslash key for before and after, and we've got to there. And I think I will leave it that for now for those edits. I will want to do a crop, so R for my recrop tool. Well, I don't know what R stands for, but it is for the crop tool, so I use the word recrop just so that it makes sense to me. I prefer that sort of thing. Click OK. There's my base edit for now. I don't think I really want to do anything else, do I? Possibly a little bit exposure up overall. Just a little bit. Anyway, fiddling. Stop it, Mark. Lens blur. Okay, another aspect of this tool. Let's click apply first. And now we are going to have a look at visualize depth. You may have noticed immediately that this looks a bit different, little more tower blocks standing up. That's because Adobe has recognized there's a lot more levels of depth. It's been able to see that that boat's a little bit further back. In the previous picture, it was very, very flat. There's an obvious boat in the middle, and then there was an obvious background. But here there are many more stages, so we've got these little tower blocks. And again, near is this end and far at the far end. Let's click on visualize depth. And notice we've now got some colours here. The very foreground here is yellow. So if we look at the area we've got in yellow, or at least orange to yellow, that is what it's classing as foreground. Some of that might be off the crop, by the way. And where dark or purple is the darkest part, the furthest part from the camera as a depth map, and the pinks are in the middle ground. So this is its interpretation, and just by using our eyes we can kind of see it's kind of got it right. I mean, I would challenge this bit because that's equally as far back as the bridge and the wall, so really that should have been coloured more as they are and not the same sort of colour as the middle ground. it's picked that out as being further forward than the wall immediately left to it, but that can be forgiven. But generally, the colour sweep through from the yellows through to the purples kind of matches what we're after. So this is a good visualization. So again, it's given us a bit of foreground blur and a bit of background blur. And if we slide this here, as you slide over it, you can see that the highlight shifts to where the focus area is, and it starts to render the rest a different color. So let's do that again. So if I slide it forward now, I've made the window, I've made that narrow gap less. So you can actually follow your focus by looking at the white. That's one way of doing it. Or you can actually see that it's kind of this color you want as your unblurred bit. So I'm looking over the right, and I'll just bring this over. Anyway, that is one of the ways you can use the visualization tool, but it does add a little bit of extra processing power while you're using it, and that's why I prefer not necessarily to use it. Okay, let's switch visualization off and let's look at what Adobe's automatic application did here. It was somewhere in the middle. It was somewhere around about there. It's blurred the background. There's a bit of blur in the foreground, but you can't really tell because there's not an awful lot of it sticking through. I'm going to make it a little bit more by sliding it this way and start to blur this boat, because this is it doing it automatically. Okay, over here you've got some tools. This one is based on subject detection. So I clicked on that and it's now gone and changed this. Let's do that again. I'll move this back to here. And I click on that. It's gone to subject detection. Let's stop right there. Switch this off. Go to our mask. Create new mask and choose select subject. That is the subject. That's what Adobe thinks is the subject. So I'll delete that mask. And we close them and go back to our lens blur. And if I choose select subject, that is what is being targeted. Okay, what if I wanted to target up here? Well, I could slide back and forward, or I can click on this one, which is my selection. And with that, with that chosen, I can draw a box round, and it will use that as the place where it wants to be in focus. And notice how the blur runs away from there. So you can, in any one picture, target a particular thing and the blur will change accordingly. So let's go back to select subject again, so it did its thing. And I do want to slide this time to the left to blur the back quite a bit. In fact, a bit more. To about there for this effect. There are some clear things I've got to fix here. Again, it's not necessarily a fan of vertical things which stick up from the top of boats. We want to fix that. And I also want to bring in the foreground of this. So what do? We go to our focus tool. I'll just leave them as is, I think. Now, because this is a brush, I can click once, move, hold my shift key down and click again, and it will draw that in a straight line for me. That's what the brush tool does anyway. I don't know if you knew that, but if, let's say, let's go back to a mask. Let's create a new mask, create a brush, and let's say I wanted the brush to highlight the harbour wall here where that line of black is going along. Let's put some exposure up. Let's click once there, move my cursor to there, hold down my shift, click again, and there is the line of exposure applied. So you can draw straight lines. Delete mask. Let's get back to blur. Meanwhile, back in blur, we've moved this to the foreground. I've corrected that mask-ish. I still think I want to add a little bit more focus and just fix the side of the boat there. I mean, I could zoom in and do this very, very detailed, but I don't need to, as long as you know how to. Just come back down through the top of that again. Yeah, I think I slightly missed it last time, so I'll just manually draw that as a straight line. And I want to bring out just the bow of this boat. So up and down and back. And I want to do a little bit of its reflection as well. Okay, that is more or less it. So we haven't spent as much time on this one because we've already explained quite a bit of the features, but I wanted to point out the fact you've got subject and manual, you've got your visualization, and that you can just paint on the same way as you would use painting when you're in the various masks. What else would I do to this? Well, to be honest with you, I would zoom in here because I can see that my brush was too wide, and I'd fix that. So how would I fix that? Well, I'd just go to blur, make my brush a bit littler, and I could just paint the blur back in like that. Okay. So there is our second picture. So before and after with our backslash key, and that's what we've got to. Okay, third and final picture now. So in this picture, I want to put a bit of blur on. I also want to use the Bokeh tool, or Bokeh tool, that comes with the lens blur, and have a look at one or two settings there. And I also want to pick out the sage building, which is somewhere in the night time there. And in doing so, I'll ask the question, do you ever edit in order to show you things so that you can make a further edit and then undo that? I kind of put some sort of reference or guide in place. It's easier to demonstrate than say. Clearly this picture is too dark for me to really work out what the sage is doing, but I want the picture ultimately to be dark. So I'm going to come to my basics and I'm going to bump the exposure up so I can better see what is going on with the sage. I don't want it that bright, but I do want to be able to see the sage more clearly. So let's start with selecting subject and see whether Lightroom thinks the sage is the subject or not. Where are we? There we are. Select subject. It has. That's quite good. Now that I know that the subject is quite good for what I want, I don't actually want it as a selection. This will make sense. Bear with me. I just wanted to check that it was the correct selection, because I want to put a radial gradient on here to represent the glow behind the sage. So I'm going to put that as my radial gradient. Quite feathered, as you can see. It's not sharp by any means. Quite a bit of feather, and I want to use that to lift the exposure. But I want to subtract the sage. That's why I wanted to know that it was making a good job of selecting the building. So I'll now say subtract subject. It just took me a couple of seconds to work out that selection was correct. If I show my overlay, however, there's more than behind the sage being highlighted here. There's all its foreground. So I want to make another subtraction. You can do so much more by combining masks than thinking of them as one at a time. I'm going to subtract using a linear gradient from there and slide up. And that is more or less what I want in this. Okay, so I've used that now to add my light behind the sage. Let's close that and undo that exposure reference I put in. Now that I'm happy with what it's actually doing, I can come in here, lift that, lift the shadows and the highlights, and bring this up, possibly even put a little bit of colour change in there, a bit more blue or a bit of yellow, a little bit more blue. And if I want to make the gradient further, I just need to click on it and move this, and the subtractions remain static, so the subtractions still apply to the sage and the linear gradient. I can actually move this completely around like this, and those subtractions stay in place. That's one of the beauties of masks. So I'm going to leave that about there. So there we go, we've got that in place. Now let's crack on. I want to soften the foreground as well as blur it, so I'm going to actually put another linear gradient in here across the water, and I'm going to use that just to take the texture out of the water. You can see how it softens those lights coming across. And now I'm ready to play with my blur. So I'm just going to let it do its thing and see what it decides to do. Lens blur, apply. Now, because there's not a lot of dynamic change in this, a lot of black in the picture, notice we don't have a great deal of tower blocks. So it's very difficult to see what it's done, although I can definitely see blur in the foreground. So I'm just going to slide that to the right, and it has, as I expected, not predicted, it has come up through the lights down here. So I'm going to take that a little bit further, and it's added that in there, and I'm going to increase the amount of blur as well. So I'm quite happy it's blurring that across, and that's kind of it for the general application. Now I'm going to click on the blur as a refinement and use the brush that it gives me to just come over some of these lights. Like so, and notice how, because they are lights and rounded, it's actually picked up the bokeh. And if I roll this back, it rolls it off, and if I bring it to the far side, it strengthens it. But I can now go through and choose a style. So let's strengthen it, shall we? Boost it, and let's try the next one. I rather like that. You notice particularly on these lights here, and there's a hexagonal one. You get another one with a double ring, and another one which is a cat's eye type bokeh. I preferred that one. I don't think it wants to be that strong, so I'll roll it off. And I think I'll also let Adobe tell me off again, because I had some masks and applied blur, so I'll just go in and click any one of them. It went red dot on me, and update AI masks. And I'm going to say select sky and see how good it does. Select sky. That's not bad, because all I want to do is roll the texture down on the sky, because there was a bit of grain in there, so rolling the texture down helps. Right, finally I'll just add a crop on this. Bring this in, probably take the lights just to the edge here, bounce that up back to the middle, and I'll probably just add, even though it's quite dark anyway in the corners, a little bit more of a vignette. So let's go before and after, and there you are. I hope you've enjoyed that. I hope you clicked on that subscribe button. If you haven't, ask yourself why. Write it down. I must click on that subscribe button 20 times, and then click on the like button. Click on the bell to be notified of future things. Leave me a comment, ask any questions. If there's any suggestions you would like to see me do with polite suggestions you'd like to see me do with Lightroom and Photoshop, just stick them in comments. A lot of my videos are done by request. And happy blurring. I'll see you on the next one. Bye for now.